What's going on, guys? Arekkz here, and welcome to the first episode in a series of videos that I'm going to be making on Dauntless. For those of you that have been on this channel a while, then you may remember I made some Dauntless weapon guides back during the early alpha stage, but now that the game is entering the open beta phase and there have been some significant improvements, it's about time I update those. I want to thank the guys over at Phoenix Labs for very kindly sponsoring this series. We've teamed up to cover all 5 of the available weapons, and across these videos I'll be going over everything you need to know, from the basic moves and combos all the way up to some overarching weapon theory. So that way, if any of you guys plan to jump in and give the game a shot during the open beta, you'll be able to do so with a good understanding of the weapons beforehand. To kick things off, we're going to start by talking about the sword, since it's the weapon you'll begin the game with, and while you're free to swap very shortly after, it's realistically your best starting point. The sword offers you great mobility and fast attacking combos, whilst also enabling you to dish out great damage when using the weapon to its full potential. While on the surface it may seem relatively simple, it's through this simplicity that the weapon's flexibility presents itself. The sword is an all-round, balanced weapon, but thanks to the inbuilt meter and the overdrive capability, you have access to some great burst damage options on top. So let's take a more in-depth look. To begin with, before we dive into the core moves, it's first important to understand that the sword works around a meter located at the top of the screen. Every time you attack, this meter begins to fill, and you'll then use this meter to access some of your burst damage options that we'll cover shortly. As is to be expected, faster hitting attacks that are weaker in combat excel at building meter, meanwhile the slower, stronger, more damaging attacks should be reserved for exactly that, damage. You'll mix and match your moves based on your opening when fighting a behemoth, but keep in mind that you ideally want to have resource in your meter so that it's available when you need it the most. Therefore, the beginning of a fight will typically be more focused around building the meter, then once you're in the right place, you can switch your focus to damage. So, with that in mind, let's talk about the moves. With your weapon drawn, your first fast-hitting combo is the Quad Cross. This is performed with 4 consecutive X inputs. It's a quick combo comprised of a series of diagonal slices and ends in this rather flashy spin slash. Given that your X attacks are your light attacks, then as mentioned just a moment ago, this is going to be one of your primary meter building combos. This doesn't do massive damage, but it's fast, and should you need to, you can roll out the combo at any point. It's also worth mentioning that you might, given the opening, want to consider dropping the final hit. Given the slightly lengthy animation, you could instead perform the first 3 attacks, then roll so as to remain mobile, and following a roll you can dip back into the core combo. In fact, whilst on the topic of rolling, after a roll you can press X or Y for a follow-up attack, but X is by far the quickest and most fluid option, so you'll typically use this whenever you need to reposition in combat and want to do so with minimal downtime. Now moving on from there, your second combo is the Rising Elements attack. This is 3 consecutive Y inputs. Since this is comprised of heavy attacks, this should be used for damage and not meter building. Keep in mind that any attacks will still build meter, but if your focus was meter, then this wouldn't be your go-to combo. Naturally, this combo is a little bit slower, and as such you want to pick and choose your combos based on your openings. Another option is the Triple Elements combo. This is a combination of both light and heavy attacks. It's 3 consecutive X inputs followed by 2 Y inputs. However, keep in mind that there's a little bit of timing that you need to master in order to pull this off. See, following the 3rd X input, you'll see this little effect on your blade and an accompanying sound effect. This right here is your window to transition into Rising Elements, as opposed to just continuing with the default 4-hit X combo. When you see or hear this, input the Y buttons to transition into the heavy finisher. This is handy if you were building meter, and then suddenly an opening presents itself, perhaps the behemoth flinches, goes down, gets stunned, or you realise that you've built the meter you need, and have time for a more damaging hit. Conversely, there's also an option for this in reverse, the Repeating Elements combo. This starts with 2 heavy attacks on Y, and then much like before, there's a small delay and that audio-visual cue. If at this point you then begin spamming X, you'll go into this fast flurry attack. Keep in mind that this consumes your stamina, so you won't be able to do this indefinitely, but given the speed, it's also an exceptional meter builder. So in times where perhaps you go in for damage, or taking advantage of your meter, and then realise you have an opening to build more meter quickly, this is a great move to sneak in at the end. So from both the basic X and Y combos, you have windows of opportunity to transition into the other, if you want to change your focus. Then finally, the last component of the sword ties directly into the meter I've been speaking about this whole time. You have both Etheric Burst and Overdrive. If you have some, but not all of your meter built, in other words, some of the nodes are filled but there's not the complete blade outline, then pressing RB will perform the Etheric Burst. This is both an attack and also a buff. Once activated, you gain a temporary boost to both attack speed and power, but it will quickly deplete what meter you have, so this is where your burst damage comes in. While it might not last exceptionally long, given a good window, you can dish out some great damage with this. You can press RB at the end of a combo to round out with the burst, and if you then follow this with one of your heavy hitting combos, taking full advantage of the improved attack speed and power, then you really can dish out some incredible damage relatively quickly. Also, given how easy it is to build meter in the first place, then realistically this is something you should have access to pretty much all the time. Just keep in mind that once activated, you can't rebuild meter until the current meter has finished depleting. Furthermore, I mentioned that the Arekkz burst is also an attack, but it's also a great move to use to interrupt a behemoth too. Certain behemoth moves have windows of opportunity where if you hit them, you can interrupt its attack and cause it to topple, like this. While this can be done with other moves too, for the sword, the Arekkz burst is especially good for this. Then finally, the last move for the weapon is Overdrive. This is performed when your meter is full. Pressing RB will now activate the same attack speed and power buff, only it will last longer since you're on full meter, but you'll also send out a projectile too. So rather unconventionally, for a sword, it also has a ranged attack too. This is great for taking advantage of the element of your weapon since the ranged projectile dishes out the corresponding damage. So when deciding between the short burst and the longer overdrive, again it's going to largely depend on your opening. Naturally the overdrive lasts longer, so you can make it go further, but taking advantage of the burst attack's interruptibility means there'll also be times where you want to dip into it early. There's no right or wrong way, so pick and choose based on your window of opportunity. Just make sure you're using it because this is an important part of your damage output. So, now that you know how the weapon works and you understand what the different moves are used for, how do we tie it all together? For this, I'm just going to cut together a few more extended gameplay clips to try and illustrate some typical sword flow. As mentioned, the first focus for me is always to build my meter. The two ways to do that are either through the basic X combo or through the repeating elements combo, but keep in mind the latter one, while fast, does require more stamina commitment, so I tend to begin with the X attacks whilst I'm finding my openings, and then if I decide I have a larger window, I might commit more into the latter combo too. I want to ensure that I always have at least one block of meter, since I then have access to my special attack if the monster charges at me and I want to pull off a well-timed interrupt. Interrupting a monster mid-charge or mid-attack can present great openings for you and your team, so while risky, sometimes it's worth the shot. If the behemoth goes down and I know I have a large window, then I'll ensure I open with my special so that I can get that damage and speed buff, and then I can dip into my more damaging combos, which are now even more powerful and even faster. However, conversely, keep in mind that the special is also a great way to end a combo, and often trigger a flinch in the process. So if you begin a combo in between a behemoth's attacks, and in doing so you've built sufficient meter, consider rounding it out with a special attack. You will then be buffed up and ready to go should that result in a bigger opening. Keep in mind that if you need to reposition at times, rolling and attacking is a great way to do so whilst minimizing any downtime. It really does allow you to stick to a behemoth like glue and take full advantage of the speed of the sword. Well, that, my friends, is pretty much it. That's the sword, one of Dauntless's 5 weapons, fast, mobile, and lethal in the right hands. If you're diving into the game for the first time, then this weapon is a great starting point, but similarly, it's also an exceptional weapon when you know what you're doing. So if speed is your thing, then this might just be what you're looking for. Be sure to keep it locked, as there'll be more weapon guides coming very soon, going over the remaining weapons, but until then, if you have any questions, by all means drop them down below. But until next time, thanks so much for watching, take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.